Welcome to the deep dive. And I actually want to start today by talking directly to you. Yeah, you, the learner, listening to this right now.
Right.
Because if you're anything like me, you probably have this massive stack of nonfiction books on your nightstand, and it's starting to look like a literal structural hazard.
Oh, yeah. The towering pile of guilt.
Exactly, the guilt pile. You've got, dozens of saved articles, a huge backlog of leadership frameworks, and just this constant, endless influx of cognitive behavioral strategies flooding your feeds every single day.
It's overwhelming.
It really is. You're constantly trying to upgrade your mental models, right? But the sheer volume of densely tacked business advice coming from literally every corner of the internet is just staggering. We get handed these massive convoluted maps that claim to show the exact way to peak effectiveness. And frankly, it usually just induces paralysis.
Yeah, totally.
We are drowning in how-tos while we are, frankly, completely starving for foundational clarity. Well, it creates this really fascinating paradox, I think, because the modern professional, they have access to more strategic information than literally any generation in human history.
Right.
But at the same time, we're seeing incredibly high rates of burnout, of executive dysfunction, and just strategic drift. The complexity of the solutions has actually become the barrier to executing them.
Which is exactly why our focus today is so compelling.
Yeah.
Because we are basically cutting through all of that noise with a blunt instrument.
Yes, we are.
We've got our hands on this original study guide. It's titled The Diary of Face EO Study Guide.pdf. And just to set the parameters right up front so we're all on the same page, this material is inspired by the themes of Steven Bartlett's book, but it is not a summary of the book.
I know, not at all.
Right. It's entirely new educational material. And it's designed to engineer a very specific, highly resilient mentality completely from the ground up.
Yeah, I like to think of it as a behavioral architecture.
Oh, I like that. Because we aren't looking at some list of quick business tips here. We're looking at a literal blueprint for constructing what they call a CEO-level cognitive ecosystem.
Cognitive ecosystem. Okay, so our mission today is to essentially deconstruct this ultimate blueprint. We're going to examine the 10 core pillars of success it demands. We'll break down its honestly relentless daily application engine, and then analyze the structural choice in the document that is so unconventional, I genuinely thought my PDF reader was glitching when I first opened it.
Yeah, that part is wild. I can't wait to get into that.
It's crazy, but we've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's unpack this. The whole document revolves around this single key idea that dictates you must build 10 specific traits. And the first 5 form what I see as this internal fortress. So we have discipline, emotional intelligence, resilience, health, and continuous learning.
Right, and you really have to notice the deliberate introversion of that list.
Introversion, how so?
Well, before the guide allows you to even think about, market fit or scaling a team or dealing with some supply chain crisis, it demands a ruthless audit of your internal state.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, it operates on this premise that external chaos will inevitably fracture a fragile internal foundation. If the inside isn't solid, the outside collapses.
It totally makes me think of a smartphone operating system. Like, we all obsess over downloading the flashy apps, right?
Oh, constantly.
We want the advanced financial modeling app, the charismatic public speaking app, the viral marketing app. But these 5 traits, discipline, emotional intelligence, resilience, health, continuous learning, they aren't apps. They are the iOS or the Android of your brain.
I love that analogy. Let's push that further, actually, starting with the very first directive on their list, discipline. Because if these traits are the operating system, discipline is the source code that allows the whole system to boot up in the first place.
Right. Not motivation, discipline.
Exactly. The guide starts here because, biologically speaking, motivation is fleeting. It's just a spike in dopamine that gets you to sketch out a cool business plan on a napkin at a coffee shop.
We've all been there.
Right. But discipline is the unglamorous neuroplastic wiring that forces you to sit at your desk at 6:03 a.m. on a Tuesday 3 years later when the novelty is completely gone and the market is turning against you.
So discipline is basically the battery. It's the raw, unyielding power source. But then sitting right next to this really rigid concept of discipline, The text demands emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And look, I know you listening are well aware of what EQ is. We aren't going to sit here and define empathy for you, but I do want to explore how EQ mechanically functions at a high executive level, because historically, I mean, let's be honest, the corporate world treated EQ as a soft skill,
Oh,
right? Like
absolutely.
it was nice to have maybe for HR, but definitely not a core pillar of a hard-nosed, successful CEO.
Well, and those older paradigms severely miscalculated the actual mechanical reality of business. Because business is not this frictionless environment of pure mathematics. It just isn't.
Right.
It is a highly volatile ecosystem of very irrational human beings. So if discipline is your battery, emotional intelligence is the RAM.
So RAM, okay, explain that.
It's your system's ability to process multiple, highly complex human inputs simultaneously without crashing. So imagine a CEO in a high-stakes merger negotiation. A leader with immense discipline but really low EQ might just hammer the financial logic endlessly.
It's just pounding the table with the spreadsheet.
Exactly, and they completely miss the micro-expressions of the counterpart sitting across the table.
Yeah.
A counterpart who was hesitating not because of the valuation, but maybe because of this ego-driven fear of losing their status post-merger.
So the high EQ CEO reads that room, validates the ego, and actually saves the deal, while the low EQ CEO just shouts their logic louder and kills the deal.
Precisely. EQ is the regulatory mechanism that prevents your discipline from becoming destructive. It modulates your delivery. It prevents you from triggering these amygdala hijacks in your own leadership team.
Right.
So it's not soft at all. It is a highly technical skill of reading and routing human energy.
Man, routing human energy, that's a great way to put it. Which brings us to the third pillar, resilience. And again, let's move past the basic bouncing back from failure definition that we hear all the time.
Yeah, bouncing back is too passive.
Right. Because bouncing back implies just returning to your original shape, like a rubber band. But in a high-velocity environment, if you return to your original shape, it means you haven't actually learned anything from the hit.
That's spot on. The guide is pointing towards psychological elasticity or even, honestly, post-traumatic growth. True executive resilience is the capacity to absorb a massive systemic failure, take that emotional fallout, run it through the EQ processing center we just talked about, extract the structural data from the collapse.
The lessons, basically.
Exactly, the lessons, and then deploy a completely new, hardened strategy. It's not just about surviving the punch. It's about metabolizing that failure into operational intelligence.
Metabolizing failure. I love that. Okay, I want to pause on the fourth pillar, though, because it is the one that, well, it frequently gets lip service, but it rarely gets any structural priority in traditional business literature, and that is health.
Oh, yes. This is huge.
Because you read memoirs of famous founders, and there's always this romanticization of the 100-hour work week, right? The sleep deprivation, literally sleeping under your desk in a sleeping bag.
A hustle culture myth.
Exactly. Yet this blueprint elevates health to a strictly non-negotiable foundational virtue, up there with resilience and discipline.
And there's a very scientific reason for that. It's because the separation of mind and body is just a corporate myth.
Yeah.
We just outlined the heavy cognitive demands of discipline, of emotional regulation, and psychological elasticity.
Right, they take effort.
They don't just take effort. They are biologically expensive processes. They require immense amounts of glucose and a fully optimized prefrontal cortex. So when a leader chronically deprives themselves of sleep and movement, their baseline cortisol levels just skyrocket.
And elevated cortisol literally alters how the brain functions.
It physically changes it. It shifts blood flow away from the prefrontal cortex, which, is the center of long-term planning and impulse control, and it routes that blood directly to the amygdala, your threat detection center.
Wow.
So a sleep-deprived, physically depleted CEO is biologically incapable of executing high-level strategic thinking. They just become highly reactive. They start treating a minor logistical hiccup like a lethal existential threat.
So they're basically operating in survival mode in a boardroom.
Exactly. The guide includes health, not for aesthetic reasons or just to feel good, but because physical vitality is the required biological substrate for cognitive dominance. If your battery is constantly at, 2%, your complex behavioral apps are going to crash the second any stress is applied.
The hardware fundamentally has to support the software.
Yes.
And that brings us to the final internal pillar, continuous learning, which I guess is the mechanism for updating that software, right? It's the patch that prevents obsolescence.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
And I really love the placement of this trait at the very end of the internal list. It kind of acts as a guardrail against arrogance.
It absolutely does.
Because the moment you achieve a certain level of mastery, Your ego just wants to calcify. You think, I've made it, I know how this works. Continuous learning requires this daily humiliation of admitting there is still a massive gap in your understanding.
It forces the leader to remain in a state of intellectual beta. Because the velocity of market change today, it dictates that whatever operational knowledge got you to your current level of success is probably the exact knowledge that will bottleneck your next phase of growth.
Oh, that's a tough pill to swallow.
It is. Continuous learning is essentially the intentional destruction of your own outdated mental models before the market does it for you.
Wow. Okay, so we've built this formidable internal fortress. The operating system is installed, it's optimized, it's constantly updating. But a really powerful computer sitting in a dark room, completely disconnected from the network, is completely useless.
It has to output something.
Exactly. How does this machine actually interface with the world? And that's where the study guide shifts its focus outward, outlining 5 external traits: long-term thinking, effective communication, customer-centric problem-solving, leadership, and purposeful action.
This is the pivot. This is where potential energy converts into kinetic energy. And honestly, the friction begins immediately with that first one. Long-term thinking.
Oh, massive friction. Because we exist in an economic reality that is entirely driven by quarterly capitalism and a digital culture driven by algorithmic dopamine.
Right.
Literally every incentive structure in modern society screams at you to optimize for the next 30 days.
Which is why long-term thinking is essentially an act of sustained rebellion.
Yeah.
It's really hard. It requires an incredible tolerance for being misunderstood.
Misunderstood by who?
By everyone. Your board, your employees, the market. Let's look at the mechanics of it. A true long-term thinker must be willing to endure short-term dips in metrics or revenue or even public approval to secure a strategic position a decade out.
Right.
Think about the CEO who cannibalizes their own highly profitable legacy product just to invest in a disruptive technology that currently loses money. To the short-term market analyst, that looks like complete incompetence.
They think you're crazy. But surviving that misunderstanding requires the next external trait: effective communication.
Yes, exactly.
Because if you are going to take your company through the desert because you truly believe there is an oasis 10 miles away, you better be able to articulate that vision. Otherwise, it just looks like you're leading everyone into the sand to die.
That's so true. Communication is the translation layer between your internal vision and the external reality. But I think it's really vital to separate effective communication from mere charisma.
Okay. Distinguish those for me.
Well, a lot of truly disastrous leaders have been incredibly charismatic, right?
Yeah, right, true.
Effective communication, at least in the context of this blueprint, is about maximizing the signal-to-noise ratio within an organization. It's the ability to distill extreme complexity into a very clear, unified directive that an entire organization can execute against without the core message degrading.
With the telephone game, basically. You have to prevent the message from getting distorted as it goes down the chain.
Exactly.
Now, here is the anomaly in the list. This is the moment in the guide that actually stopped me in my tracks.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, we have all these grand, sweeping philosophical concepts, right? Resilience, leadership, discipline. And sitting right smack in the middle of these broad virtues is customer-centric problem solving.
Yep.
It sounds like jargon pulled directly from like a middle management seminar. Why in the world does the text elevate this highly specific functional concept to the level of a fundamental executive virtue?
Because it acts as the ultimate reality check. It is the tether that keeps this entire philosophy grounded in actual utility.
Okay, walk me through that.
Think about it. Without customer-centric problem solving, you can very easily build an incredibly disciplined, highly resilient, beautifully communicative organization that is marching incredibly efficiently directly toward a cliff.
Ah, the beautiful bridge to nowhere.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Consider how many brilliant founders fall in love with the elegance of their own code or the sophistication of their own engineering.
Oh, all the time in Silicon Valley.
Right. They spend millions of dollars, years of their lives, building a product with zero friction, flawless design, absolute technical superiority that solves a problem literally no one actually has.
Like those high-tech Wi-Fi-enabled juicers from a few years ago?
Oh my gosh, yes. Perfect example.
They cost, what, hundreds of dollars? And essentially did the exact same thing as just squeezing the juice bag with your bare hands. Immense engineering talent, zero customer reality.
Exactly. By embedding customer-centric problem-solving directly into the core pillars, the guide institutionalizes a mechanism against ego. It forces the leader to constantly ask, is our internal excellence actually removing friction from a real human being's life?
And if the answer is no,
If the answer is no, your company isn't a business. It's just a very well-funded, highly disciplined art project.
man, a well-funded art project, I think that's a brutal but completely necessary awakening. You have to point all that internal horsepower at a target that actually matters.
Right.
And once you do that, you face a new bottleneck. You cannot scale it alone.
Which brings us to leadership.
Mm.
And notice how late in the game leadership appears. It's the 8th out of the 10 pillars.
Yeah, this positioning is a really profound commentary on organizational behavior because it suggests that leadership is not a starting attribute. You don't just wake up a leader, it is an emergent property.
An emergent property, so it comes out of the other things. Yes. You do not begin as a leader simply by claiming the title or getting promoted. You earn the gravitational pull of leadership only after you have demonstrated the discipline, the EQ, the resilience, and the clear customer-centric vision that we just outlined. People do not follow titles. They follow the coherent application of those earlier traits.
That makes a ton of sense, which culminates in the final pillar, purposeful action. And the tension between this and long-term thinking is fascinating to me. They exist on complete opposite ends of a spectrum, and the CEO basically has to hold them both simultaneously.
They do, because action without long-term thinking is just the illusion of productivity.
Just spinning your wheels.
Right. It's the executive who runs on a treadmill at maximum speed, sweating, exhausted, firing off emails at 11:00 p.m., achieving inbox zero, but they're moving the company absolutely nowhere because the activity is completely detached from a macro strategy.
But the reverse is just as dangerous, isn't it? Long-term thinking without purposeful action is just academic daydreaming.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the perpetual strategist who has a flawless 10-year roadmap but can't even execute a basic product launch today. Purposeful action demands that the macro vision is immediately broken down into micro executions.
It's the relentless alignment of the granular with the grand. Every single task, no matter how mundane, like literally drafting a memo, must survive the question, how does this specific action serve the 10-year objective?
Okay, so we've built the theoretical framework. The 10 pillars make perfect sense on a whiteboard, but theory doesn't survive contact with reality without a mechanism. Like, how does a person actually force themselves to do this, day after day, amidst the chaos of their actual life?
That's where it gets highly practical.
Right, the guide moves from philosophy to brutal mechanics with this tripartite application framework. So it outlines 3 distinct tasks: reflection, an action exercise, and a journal prompt. Let's look at the reflection first. The mandate here is incredibly constrained. It literally says, write 1 lesson you can apply this week.
The operative parameter there is 1, just 1.
I have to admit, my instinct, and I strongly suspect the instinct of many high achievers listening to this right now, is to consume a framework like this, get hit with a massive wave of inspiration, and try to overhaul my entire existence by Monday morning.
Oh, for sure.
I'm going to say, I'm going to master my EQ, I'm going to run 5 miles a day, restructure my entire org chart, and finally learn how to code.
And by Thursday, your neurological system has violently rejected the entire intrusion. You've abandoned all the new behaviors, and you are right back at your baseline, only now you're carrying a heavier load of internalized guilt.
Yes, exactly that. Why does that happen, and why is this guide so insistent on restricting us to just 1 single lesson?
Because the human brain is fundamentally designed to maintain homeostasis. It views sudden, massive behavioral shifts not as exciting growth, but as an existential threat.
Really? Like a biological threat?
Yes. When you attempt a total life overhaul, you trigger a massive spike in allostatic load, which is basically the wear and tear on your body and brain from chronic stress. So your brain actively fights the new routines to return you to safety.
It's trying to protect you from yourself.
Exactly. By demanding the application of only 1 lesson, the guide engages the strategy of marginal gains and slips right past the brain's threat detection system. It lowers the barrier to entry so drastically that you actually step over it.
It's hacking your own resistance.
It is.
But then we hit the second part of the engine, the action exercise, and the difficulty ramps up significantly here. The text requires the reader to identify 1 habit, 1 relationship, and 1 business or career skill to improve, and then track their progress daily.
Yes.
So the habit is personal, the skill is professional, the relationship is social.
It forces a holistic advancement protocol because the trap for the highly ambitious is hyperspecialization. You pour all your cognitive resources into the business skill, like financial forecasting, for example, and you completely neglect the personal and social domains.
Okay, I'm going to push back hard on this requirement, though. Tracking a specific habit. Sure, I get that. Tracking a career skill, absolutely. But tracking a relationship daily? That feels incredibly pedantic, maybe even a little clinical.
I know it sounds that way.
I mean, isn't a CEO supposed to be focused on the macro vision of the company, not like micromanaging their daily conversations with their co-founder or their spouse on a spreadsheet?
I hear you. It sounds clinical,
Yeah.
but until you realize the alternative is benign neglect.
Benign neglect.
Think about it. The macro vision of a company relies entirely on the micro interactions between humans. If you are not actively tracking the health of a vital relationship, say, the trust between you and your chief operating officer, it will inevitably degrade under the friction of corporate stress.
But why track it daily? That just seems like so much overhead.
Because relationships don't usually fail in spectacular explosions. They erode through 1,000 tiny, unaddressed moments of disconnection.
Death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Precisely. By forcing you to track a relationship daily, the guide demands that you apply the emotional intelligence and effective communication pillars in real time. It forces you to sit down at 8:00 p.m. and ask yourself, did I actually listen to my partner today? Did I give clear, empathetic feedback to my team, or was I dismissive because I was stressed?
Oh, wow.
You cannot hide from the data of your own daily behavior. It prevents you from achieving professional dominance at the cost of personal isolation.
Okay, when you put it like that, it makes sense. Which honestly requires an immense amount of the discipline and resilience we talked about in Chapter 1 just to maintain the tracking itself. It's a self-testing loop.
It really is.
Which brings us to the psychological core of the guide. The third part of the daily engine is the journal prompt. What decisions today align with the person you want to become? Now, this feels fundamentally different from tracking a habit. It's more like an identity shift.
It is. It moves the user from just behavioral tracking to full-on cognitive restructuring. It leverages the concept of identity-based habits.
How does that work?
Well, most people try to change their behavior to achieve a goal, right? They say, I want to read 50 pages a day to become smart. This prompt reverses the flow entirely. It asks you to define the future identity first. I am a continuous learner, and then let that established identity dictate the daily action.
You essentially reverse engineer your future self.
Exactly.
Let's map out how this actually works as a filter in a highly specific kind of mundane scenario, because I think that helps. Let's say it's 6:00 p.m. You are exhausted, your cortisol is super high.
The worst time of day.
Right. You get an email from a major client, and their tone is aggressive, unfair, and borderline insulting. Your immediate reactive instinct, which is driven by your amygdala, as we discussed, wants to fire back a sarcastic, defensive reply that just puts them in their place.
Right, which is a completely natural biological response to perceived disrespect.
Exactly. But before you hit send, you run that action through the journal prompt. You ask yourself, does sending this defensive email align with the person I want to become?
And suddenly, the mechanism of the prompt reveals itself. You are forced to visualize the avatar of your future self. The CEO who possesses elite emotional intelligence, long-term thinking, and resilience.
And that person wouldn't send the email.
That future version of you does not engage in petty, ego-driven email skirmishes. That future version recognizes that a sarcastic reply might deliver a, 10-second dopamine hit of vindication, but it ultimately destroys a $1 million relationship and violates the entire pillar of effective communication.
So the filter actually overrides the biology. Instead of firing off the email, you close the laptop. You apply discipline. You wait until the morning when your prefrontal cortex is back online and rested, and you make a phone call to de-escalate the situation.
Yes.
The prompt literally hacks your present behavior using the gravitational pull of your future identity. That's incredibly powerful.
It transforms every minor daily decision into a literal vote for or against the person you are trying to construct.
Okay, so we have deconstructed the 10 pillars. We've analyzed the rigorous mechanics of the daily reflection, the tracking, and the identity journaling. The theoretical framework is basically complete. But here is where we hit the absolute climax of this document, and it is entirely structural.
This is my favorite part.
Let me lay this out clearly for the listener because it is the most jarring aspect of the source material. Chapter 1 presents the key idea, the 10 pillars, the reflection, the action exercise, and the journal prompt.
Exactly as we have discussed them so far.
Then you turn to Chapter 2, and the text is identical. Not similar, verbatim.
Yep.
You turn to Chapter 3, identical. You flip to chapter 14, chapter 20, all the way to chapter 26. Every single chapter in this study guide is an exact repetition of the first. There are no hidden frameworks introduced later. There are no advanced level 2 strategies. It is the exact same set of instructions repeated 26 times.
When you encounter a structural choice that bold, you really have to interrogate it. Is this a formatting error, a lack of content, or is it a profound philosophical thesis on the nature of mastery?
I mean, it has to be a thesis. Think about the modern learner we addressed at the beginning of the show. We have been conditioned by the digital economy to expect a constant stream of novelty.
Oh, constantly.
We read a business book,
Yeah.
we nod along, and immediately we want the next book, the new paradigm, the secret tactic we haven't heard yet. We suffer from acute, shiny object syndrome.
And the architecture of this guide is holding up a mirror to that addiction and flatly rejecting it. It is delivering a brutally honest message. There is no secret tactic.
Right.
The fundamental laws of organizational and personal physics do not change just because you are bored with them. What is required of you in week 1 discipline, EQ, customer-centric focus, is exactly what will be required of you in week 26.
It perfectly mirrors the concept of deliberate practice in martial arts. If you watch a grandmaster train, they are not practicing 1,000 newly invented flashy techniques. They are practicing the exact same fundamental strike they learned on their very first day, but they are executing it for the 10,000th time. There's that famous Bruce Lee axiom, right? He said he didn't fear the man who practiced 10,000 kicks once. He feared the man who practiced one kick 10,000 times.
It's exactly that. Or consider the mechanics of a world-class symphony.
Yeah.
A first-chair violinist does not outgrow the basic scales. They play the exact same scales they learned as a child, but the depth, the intonation, and the micromuscular control they apply to those scales are fundamentally different. The notes haven't changed. The musician has.
The musician has changed. That is the genius of the 26 chapters. The text of the guide remains static, but the reader is the variable that changes as they move through the cycles.
Exactly.
When you read the phrase customer-centric problem solving in chapter 1, it is just a sterile academic concept. But when you read those exact same words in chapter 26, you possess 6 months of scar tissue.
You've lived it.
Yes. You have tracked metrics, you have applied the filter to hundreds of decisions, you have succeeded and you have failed. The words mean something entirely different because you have altered your internal operating system to actually understand them.
It forces the realization that true mastery is really just an endurance event against boredom. It's the capacity to tolerate the unglamorous, repetitive execution of the fundamentals long after the initial excitement has faded, until those behaviors basically bypass conscious thought and become autonomic reflexes.
Man, we have covered incredible territory today. We tore down the illusion that success is about finding the right hack and rebuilt it around a holistic operating system. We examined the internal engine discipline, EQ, resilience, health, and continuous learning.
Right.
And we saw how it powers the external execution of long-term thinking, communication, customer-centric focus, leadership, and purposeful action.
And then we analyzed the vital importance of restricting change to avoid neurological resistance, and the very demanding reality of tracking habits, skills, and relationships daily.
We looked at how reverse engineering your future identity acts as a real-time filter for your daily decisions. And finally, we uncovered the stark truth hidden in the literal repetition of those 26 chapters. Mastery isn't about consuming new information. It's about the relentless, boring execution of the right information.
It truly demands a shift in identity from a consumer of knowledge to an executor of frameworks.
Which brings us to the end of the line today. We've laid out the blueprint for you, but I want to leave you with a thought to take with you, something that stems directly from this idea of relentless repetition.
Okay, let's hear it.
We live in a culture that absolutely worships the concepts of innovation and disruption. We are constantly told we need to pivot, to reinvent, to find the next big paradigm shift.
Constant motion.
Right. But if this framework is right, if true mastery is actually just the boring, unyielding execution of the exact same 10 fundamental traits day after day for years, does that mean our modern corporate obsession with innovation is sometimes just a collective psychological excuse?
Oh, wow.
Are we endlessly searching for complex new strategies simply because we are trying to avoid doing the hard, boring, repetitive work of the fundamentals? Think about it.